Attention, everybody. The views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. It's that time again. It's the happy hour with your host, Dr. Paul, and his lovely wife, Nancy. Today's guest is super interesting, and I hope you'll find it the same way. Take it away, Dr. Paul.
All right, here we go again. It's Friday morning, and interestingly enough, as I tell you every week, Friday comes around this same time every week, without fail, until the end of things, and time will be no more. But in the meantime, we're here today, Friday morning, and it is the happy hour, and this is old Dr. Paul with sweet little Miss Nancy, my co-host, and we have a very special guest today, Dr. Steve Albrecht, and we're going to find out some good stuff, and it's important stuff. I had it on my mind in the shower this morning. A lot of good things come to me in the shower.
Yeah.
You need right now, while I'm just palavering, you need to go get pencil and paper to make some notes, write down some information so you can help spread the word, because this program, even though we're live right now, 9:31 it says on the clock, here in Springburg, USA. Well, that's Springfield. I like to call it Springburg, USA, Springfield, Missouri. But it will be repeated. This broadcast will be repeated and repeated. It'll be online and so forth. And you'll want to tell all of your friends about it. Thanks, Matt. We needed that wake-up call.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's our engineer over there for the day, Matthew
professional, can't you
Dillon
tell?
Pearson. And his sidekick, Festus, just left the building. No, there he is. Hello, Jason Cobb. I call him Festus. This is Matt Dillon and Festus. Anyway, get that pencil and paper. Be ready to write down some good stuff, because you're going to be sorry if you don't, because you'll be wanting to tell your family and friends. All right, I do have to do my usual Friday morning greeting to my first secretary, Shirley Simpson. If I didn't do that, Shirley would probably think I forgot her. She lives up in St. Joe, Missouri. Ever been to St. Joe, Steve?
I have not.
Oh, you missed it. It's a historic town. It's where Jesse James was murdered, and he was going under the name Mr. Howard, and he was killed by Bob Ford, shot him in the back, and there's a song that some of the words are, that dirty little coward who shot Mr. Howard and laid poor Jesse in his grave. You can visit the house and see the bullet hole where Jesse James was murdered. And also, it was the home of the Pony Express.
Wow.
And there's a museum there. It's a very historic old city on the Missouri River. Big, beautiful old mansions. And, of course, it used to be big with stockyards and packing house industry. A lot of history. If you ever get a chance to visit St. Joseph, Missouri, do it. And I want to say hello to Jerry Chambers over in Chesterfield, Missouri, suburb of St. Louis. Jerry was a teenager in my church in St. Joseph, and he's now a retired school administrator. So you know it's been a while since I was his pastor. Anyway, and then Judy, whose husband was very much a part of our Acts Ministry operation. Judy's down in Texas. And Galen Garrett, longtime friend, she's in Texas. And Nancy, who else am I forgetting? People in Germany, people in France, people in Turkey and Pakistan.
All over creation.
All over South America, Mexico. We have, to my friends in Mexico, ¿Cómo está usted, mi amigos? And then if they would ask me that, I would say, no dice nada. I'm learning Spanish and French at the same time. Il est très bonjour aujourd'hui, n'est-ce pas, mes amis? I'm trying to learn both of them. I'm still working on English. Okay, here we go. Steve Albrecht is Dr. Steve Albrecht. And Steve, tell us about yourself, and then I have some questions for you.
I worked in law enforcement in San Diego for 15 years. I've
wow.
been working as a threat assessment consultant for about 25 years. I wrote the first book in the country on workplace violence back in 1994.
Wow.
I've interviewed 3 murderers in prison for their crimes of workplace violence against other people. So I'm really about keeping people safe. It's part of my duty as a shepherd to keep people safe. I've been doing that since I'm 21 years old. I look at the world as a place that needs to be protected from the wolves, and so I've been doing that as a business consultant, a security consultant for a really long time. And you know, we're at an interesting part of our history. We're at a crossroads of
Right.
our culture right now, and how we see the United States and what works. So I've written a lot of books, 23 of them.
Whoa.
Six books for cops on officer safety and tactics. I wrote 3 books on guns. I'm a big Second Amendment guy, so that's about it.
Well, now you know why I want you to have the pencil and paper, because we're going to be receiving valuable information from a man who not only has been there and done that, he's still there and still doing it. And you want to stay tuned. Tell your friends to catch up on this show however they can. This is vitally important right now when we're in this cancel culture movement. Heard that phrase a few times this week. They're canceling our culture. There's a lot of violence going on. And you'll notice we start out on an upbeat because it is the happy hour. Then we deal with very serious matters, but we'll come back to some happy things in a little bit. But Steve, I had not seen these. This is great stuff. Full color. Albrecht on guns. Ready to protect when carrying concealed. That's volume 3. Albrecht and Farrell on guns. Living the concealed lifestyle.
That's number 2, volume 2.
Number 2, okay. Albrecht on guns. Tactical concealed carry. Look at that.
That's number 1.
Number 1, number 2, and number 3. Go to his website when you get a chance. Be sure and write this down. What is the website?
Sure, drstevealbrecht.com. So it's Dr. and then Steve and then Albrecht, A-L-B like Bravo, R-E-C-H-T.com.
All right. Now we'll be mentioning that again later on in this show. But I want you to make certain you write it down and get there and look it over. I've been there a few times, and in preparation to have Steve on the show, we started trying to get him on way back in early April, I think, and now we've done it, and we're glad that he's here. Steve, because we are a faith-based ministry, faith-based operation, Acts Media Group, part of Acts Ministry. Last week I failed to do this, but and I used to do it. Several weeks I did at the end of the show. I'm going to do it up toward the front here because we're going to deal with some very heavy-duty stuff. But I want you to be mindful that the greatest teacher who ever lived, Jesus of Nazareth.
I know, that's right.
In the Gospel of Matthew, the first book in the New Testament, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30, had these words that to me are very comforting. Come to me. That is, Jesus is saying this. Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And that's this old brain up here. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So we're going to deal with very serious matters, but remember Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Steve, do you have any just plain forthright recommendations for people, even here in, Ozark Mountain Country, where we don't see what's been happening in Seattle and so forth? Do you have any advice for us?
Well, the good news about Missouri compared to other states is it's a gun-friendly state, and that's what I like about it. I came from California, which is a very un-gun-friendly state, and the leadership there has always been anti-gun. I saw a statistic the other day that there are 10 million people in the county for Los Angeles, and there's 425 gun permits. So there's 425 gun permits, CCW permits, for a county with 10 million people. So the sheriff is anti-gun there, and the state itself is. So I like being in Missouri. I think there's a protection mindset in this state, which I've seen in other states, which tend to be more gun-friendly as well, Arizona and places like that, where people say, I can't rely on the police to be here. I can't rely on the sheriff to come. Some of us may live in rural communities where the sheriff or the police response is a long time coming. I think you have a right to protect your home, and also these days, I think it's important to pay attention when we're out in public to what's going on. There are a lot of mentally ill folks wandering around. That's one of the big sort of stories in our world, is that they're not treated for their mental illness, and we have people living on the street, 70% drug and alcohol issues, 70% of them have mental illness. You look at a state like California, they have 150,000 homeless people. That's the most in the United States. So I think other states, we're doing a better job in taking care of our citizens, especially the ones that need help like that. But I look at these days, you just want to have your head on a swivel. You just want to pay attention to what's going on out in the street.
That's right.
We see, even in Springfield, we're seeing protests and things, which are
Right.
fine. They're allowed to do that. Just don't hurt anybody while you're doing it.
Right.
Don't destroy anything. I'm for free speech, and I'm for the right for people to protest. And I've not been happy about some of the police tactics that I've seen in this country recently. There's a training gap for some of these officers, and there's a mindset that needs to change. But I think really you've got to take care of yourself. You just can't rely on the government or on law enforcement to take care of you.
Well, Steve, I'm glad that you took this tact on this, because lately I've been researching, and frankly I've been having difficulty finding out exactly how many active, that is like city policemen in Springfield, who are uniform wearing, badge wearing, gun wearing members of the police department, not people in the offices, but people that are available for the streets. And I haven't come up with a figure yet. Likewise, I haven't been able to come up with a figure as to how many members of the sheriff's department that are not in the office but available to be out for policing duties in the county. I haven't been able to come up with a number. But here's what I'm thinking. There's never enough police. There's never enough sheriff's deputies. People have to take a certain amount of responsibility for themselves, do they not?
Yes, and you look at large cities, you'd be shocked and amazed and disappointed about how few patrol officers are out at any one time. One of my clients is the city of Las Vegas. I've done some work for the hotels there and for the water treatment plant and for the airport. Security consulting, and on the Strip in Las Vegas, there'll be in any 8-hour period maybe 10 cops. I mean, the Las Vegas Strip is one of the most famous landmarks in the United States. There are 10 police officers to guard that particular strip of turf. When I was in San Diego, there's probably a city of 2 million people. There's probably 120 cops in the field at any one 8-hour span of time. That seems like a lot, but when you do the math with the population and you say there's not enough cops to protect people in the United States, so Greene County Sheriff, Springfield PD, the number of people that they have, you have to cut by people that are on vacation or out sick or in court, and the number gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So, there was a shift in law enforcement years ago. If your car got stolen, they'd send a cop, and he'd take a report, or she, and they would be sad about your car being stolen, your $30,000 car being stolen. Now they send a community service officer, or they say call in over the telephone and have your VIN number and your information, and we'll write a report. Where's the outrage that somebody took my car? That sort of disappeared. Now, if I'm working in my business and someone comes in and robs me of $30,000 cash at gunpoint, they'll send over some cops. They'll be more concerned. So where's the same concern when our property gets stolen? They just don't have enough cops to take those reports, to follow up. Something gets stolen out of your house, you want them to do the CSI piece with the fingerprints and all that. They don't do that either. So there's just not enough cops.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned CSI, because television is still not out of date, and our remote control, I call it my flipper dinger. I can click around channels, and CSI started something with a series of really criminal investigation, and then NCIS, NCIS Los Angeles, NCIS New Orleans. Now people are sort of beginning to think that every police department can do that kind of criminal investigation, but it's not necessarily true. Times have changed. Steve, we live in a nice neighborhood here in Springburg, USA, my favorite adopted city in the world. And but even at that, we have a very good alarm system at our home. Very good. We've had a young man whose father-in-law owns the company, and his father is a medical doctor who is the medical doctor for the company that builds their equipment. We had him as a guest on our broadcast a few months ago. I'm so thankful for our alarm system. We are well alarmed. To show you how times have changed, though, just a few years ago, I was in my writing room, which is on we're a split level house. I was on the second level, and the alarm went off for some unknown reason, and it automatically called the police. I went to the door, and here stood a city policeman, and he made it clear, what's your name? You live here, and keep your hands where I can see them. And I looked, and the lady policeman was out in the street on the curb. She had her hand on her hip where her gun, her revolver was. And I thought, you know, these people, they're really on the ball. Well, then one time, our system had a short. It went off in the night, and called the police. And I didn't know it. And I've got the flashlight. I'm going down the stairs. I'm going to check, see if there's anybody down there I have to take care of. And I look, and there's 3 policemen walking around in our backyard, and we have a locked privacy fence. And they're out there with flashlights. And I'm standing there in my pajamas, and
I'm glad to hear the part about the pajamas. I'm glad about that.
And you might know, weren't my best pajamas either. Anyway, they came up to the patio door, and they said, well, your alarm went off. I said, how'd you get in the backyard? He said, we just jumped over the fence. I know, what athleticism. I mean, it's not a short fence, and it was locked. You know, a wooden fence, and they went over it.
Fitness is an important thing for police officers in the field. It really is. I mean, we sort of discount that. Firefighters, we think about it for sure, but fitness for cops is very important.
It's very important.
They have a lot of heart attacks. They have a lot of shoulder, neck, knee, back issues.
Now that we're in this new time with canceling the culture, and we have the demonstrations and protests, and some of them become violent. Too many of them have become extremely violent, and a lot of property destruction. I do feel like we have higher awareness on the part of the general public about personal safety. In fact, even the coronavirus has caused us to be safety conscious a little bit in that regard, even about health. We've seen here since the first of the year a huge cultural shift in America. In the midst of this, I see what you do as more important than ever before. How do you see your company now? What is it you're ready to do to help people now?
You know, one of the things, I have a lot of subcontractors that work for me, and their background is in law enforcement or in government or in private security. One of my partners is the head of threat assessment, retired from Boeing. And so I have a lot of expertise in the people that I work with and around. And now we're just coming into businesses and continue to do what we do, which is assess threat, look at what could come towards their business in terms of external threats versus internal threats. I find the police discussion here is useful in our culture today, but I find it ironic that they talk about defunding the police, but yet in the same breath they say the police need to be better at their jobs. So Los Angeles is going to take $175 million away from LAPD, but LAPD needs to be better at their job. So how do we take away $175 million, which would have used for training, or would have used for hiring new cops, and would have used for updates in our policies and procedures? And so that doesn't make sense to me. It's ironic.
Well, all of this says to me what you do is becoming more important than ever. I have here, fresh off of my own printing press, as of this morning off of the internet, Oakland, California, has abolished the school police department. No more police in Oakland schools.
Denver did the same thing.
And I have all kinds of information here that I had to print off in order to get that little bit. But it's amazing what's going on. And I've heard 2 ways to pronounce this: Antifa and Antifa, which means anti-fascism. So there's a group that really are very leftist group, and by left we mean they're way out there politically. They're rubbing shoulders with the communists if they aren't communist or whatever. And I realize some of you watching this worry that maybe they'll kick us off the air for saying it, but Antifa is very involved. They're on the news, and I have one guy who's says, no, they're just a little bitty part of this that's going on. Well, even a small part can be very life-changing, culture-changing, community-changing. Something is happening in our communities, and I don't know how to say this, but it's like we need a new paradigm. And it's not that we're going to talk about anything that's violent on our part, but we need a paradigm. And you speak to this, Steve. You're the guy that knows this stuff.
I find it interesting that the Antifa people, a lot of the ones that I've seen, at least on TV, are under 30. And they seem to have no sense of history at all. So let's tear down a statue of the great emancipator known as Abraham Lincoln. Let's tear down a statue for Ulysses S. Grant, who fought a war against slavery and was an anti-slavery guy himself, but let's tear down the statue because these guys are bad news. I find that ironic and interesting that they don't have a sense of history, they don't have a sense of what this country was built upon in terms of civil rights and trying to improve race relations, starting way back in the 1800s all the way through to the Civil Rights Act Johnson signed in 1964. They have no knowledge of this whatsoever. I also am concerned from a safety perspective when you look and you say, how do these people get a pallet of bricks delivered to where they plan to protest? Who's doing that? How does that happen? And from a police safety perspective, that's a scary concern. And somebody's doing something to help those guys and those ladies. And the number of women that do these things, I find surprising as well. Women don't usually use violence to solve their problems, but the women have burned down the Wendy's and done some other things, lit police cars on fire, and it's an odd sort of approach for them. Men are usually the stupid, violent ones, not women, and yet we see a lot of women involved in that Antifa movement are quite violent.
It's almost as if they don't care who gets hurt, even people of their community. There's a very prominent news article about a lady, I think African-American lady. Her neighborhood was pretty much burned, and she had no personal transportation. She was going to have to ride a bus and make about 3 changes on a bus line just to go get groceries because her neighborhood store that was within walking distance was burned down. This is the kind of thing that's going on, and somewhere somebody has to have a plan of defense that is so good and so positive that it will begin to spill over and have an educational effect on those who are just, I think, blindly following with the mob mentality.
If you look at history, kind of going back to the civil rights riots after the death of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy in the '68, right around that time span, then you fast forward almost 30 years to 1992, which is Rodney King riots, and that was sort of the post-OJ verdict and Rodney King issue. And then we go another 30 years to 2020, and we're starting it all over again. It's interesting, these cycles come around about every 25 to 30 years. When I look at the riots and the protests now, I think also there's a pent-up energy that people have from being locked inside for 3 or 4 months, and so folks are just chomping to get out, period. That's why we see protests in general, and people, I'm sure you saw the Lake of the Ozarks party that they showed all over the United States about folks drinking beer at the swimming pool.
Right.
So I think there's a sense of people want to be out and they're tired of being cooped up inside their houses, and that's sort of a perfect storm. If folks want to protest, it gives them the reason to come out and do that.
And by the way, since we're an international broadcast, those of you who are not familiar with our area, not far from here is probably, as last that I remember, the largest man-made lake in the world, which is Lake of the Ozarks, and it's quite a playground. Many years ago, European school children were taught about, in their geography classes, about Lake of the Ozarks, and it was formed because they built Bagnell Dam as a power generating dam, and that was done by Union Electric out of St. Louis. So it has quite a history, and that's been in the news big time because of people getting out, going to one of the coves, and they were just packed in there.
That was during that was in the coronavirus
Right.
time. We're still in that, but
We're still in it. And that, by the way, glad you brought that up, Nancy. This coronavirus thing, and you mentioned that people have been shut in a while and that they had pent-up emotions, whatever.
They left their brains in their house.
What should we be doing now, since it's apparent this virus is going to be around for a while? How does this affect home security, workplace security, et cetera?
It's interesting. It's sort of a other side of the coin, which is the one benefit to people being locked up for all the span of time is no home burglaries. So people are home, and they're home with their dogs and their families and their belongings and the things they need to keep safe. There's not a lot of burglaries. Burglary is typically a daytime thing by folks that don't need money for drugs or gambling habits. That's usually the two, drugs being number one. But then there's sort of a shift that says a lot of the businesses were unoccupied. So people shut down their hardware stores and other kinds of, especially non-essential businesses, and those were vulnerable to being broken into. So, and on the one hand, we lowered the home burglary rate by people being home. On the other hand, we jacked it up on the other side in terms of the business burglaries. Mm-hmm. One of the things you mentioned about the home security alarm, which I like a lot, I think dogs and lighting and home security alarms are useful. But I've interviewed a lot of burglars in my time, in my days in the PD, and they said if we ever hear a ringing alarm, we just work faster. We just load our pockets or the pillowcase or the bag or whatever we brought with us. We just work faster because we figure the police response is going to be at a minimum 15 minutes away. So I like a silent alarm. I like something that rings and goes to an alarm company or to the PD and says, you know, there's an alarm at this house, and it does not enunciate, does not tell them that the alarm is going off, because if they hear it, you'd think they would run out of the house. They don't. They just work faster.
Well, we had a situation at our home a number of years ago when we had everything armed except our overhead garage doors. But the walk-through garage door from there into our lower level, it was armed. And of course, a few years ago, some of these guys collected garage door openers, and they'd peruse the neighborhood at night, press buttons, and during the night, somebody made it into our garage, but when they grabbed the door to come in, the alarm went off. They ran, they pushed the button, ran, and the garage door came down. So I called our alarm company, and I had them arm our doors, and I had new overhead door mechanism put in that you had to be inside the garage in order to read the code. And then at night, we have a latch and on each one of the doors, and those are locked.
I do that too.
So we try to be responsible for home security.
But then look how much you have to do to keep your house safe. You have to call the alarm company back again. You have to install new equipment. Look how much you have to do to keep up with these guys.
Yes. In fact, see, I remember most people don't know what a skeleton key is anymore. You do, I'm sure. They were about that long. And they'd open anybody's front door. And where I grew up, the front door was locked with a skeleton key.
If it was locked at all, probably,
if it was locked at all.
Right.
That was only at night, and that was because my dad wanted it locked. I didn't have a key, so I can't. My dad, bless his heart, he had to get up like at 3:30 in the morning. He ran a milk route, and I'd come in. You know, I had a car. I was out and about. I'd come in about midnight, knocking on the door. Poor Dad would get up. He never fussed. He'd come and let me in. He'd lock the door behind us. But I had
my kids did that. I'd say, sleep on the porch until I get up 3 hours later. You're not waking me up.
I had a friend here in Springburg, USA, many years ago before I moved here, and he was pastor of a local church, and I'd done a lot of speaking for him in other communities and so forth, and when I was ready to start visiting Springfield, recruiting students for a college, I would visit him, and at first they didn't keep their doors locked in the Methodist parsonage. They didn't keep their door locked, and keys in the car out in the driveway,
or on the dashboard, right?
Yeah. So I got ready to come down this way to move here. And he said, by the way, things have changed in Springfield. He said, he and his wife were going to Canada for a month on vacation. And I was going to babysit their house and their dog. He said, the house is locked. He told me where the key was. And he said, we have to keep it locked. And he said, don't leave the keys in your car. Lock your car. Take the keys with you. He
That's
said,
right.
because things have changed.
Yep.
And they had, big time. And that was back in 1977. Guess what? Springburg, USA has gotten larger, and many of the problems have gotten larger. And now we're with this new situation of the virus, and we still have home security issues, but now we have an issue of security just going to the mall or wherever, or going to church. So, Steve, what you're doing is apropos to now. I want you to go to his website. I want you to check his book list. Arm yourself by getting informed first. Being armed, I think, begins with education. And education has to come from reliable information. Don't just get your information from some good old boy or good old girl out here. Get information from a professional who has been a professional in this field for years. So if you're going to do something, make sure you know what you're doing. What's that website again?
drstevealbrecht.com, and also all the books are at Amazon, and especially the new gun books are all on Amazon Kindle.
All right.
Great.
Write all that down and be sure and do like one of the guys here with a local TV commercial. He ends it by saying, tell a friend, tell a friend. Steve, I've been pointing out something every broadcast now for weeks that I think is apropos to any broadcast that we do, because we have to remember that even though we live in a nation with a stock market that yesterday was up 23,000 something, I remember when it was 468, and there was an old multimillionaire who told me he didn't invest in the stock market. He said, people say it's going to go to 1,000. It'll never make it. Well, it did. But, and then we have signs of affluence everywhere. Nice cars, even teenagers. Have to build parking lots at schools for cars. Grocery stores, in spite of the virus, have a multitude of items to choose from. So it's a nation where it seems to shout prosperity, but there must be some underlying causes of unrest. Not only, I mean, there has to be something people grab onto that says, well, we have a better political answer. I found out last year, I think it's worse now, 57% of the working population of the United States, 57%, can't write a check for $1,000. 44% can't write a check for $400. 22% can't pay their monthly bills. And it goes on. So in the midst of we see all this affluence, we want to remember there's some folks who really, as we used to say, don't have two nickels to rub together. And some not only living from paycheck to paycheck, it's even worse because they're like 3 paychecks behind. And this could be part of the cause for unrest. However, also, I came across some statistics that our world is spending $100 million every hour, 24 hours a day, on soldiers and munitions, anything having to do with war. $100 million a day. So I can see some people don't understand why they're frustrated, but I look beneath the surface and I say, yeah, I can see why they're frustrated. How you're on the end where you can prepare people to live in that environment. Do you have any recommendations for folks like me or Acts Ministry where we are trying to do the right thing and serve where needed, where we might be able to help this situation?
I mean, I think something that you probably thought about for your entire life is the focus on the family. And if we look at the broken families in our culture and in this country, the kids that don't have fathers and the mothers that work 2 and 3 jobs, and then we look at people that are working in jobs that were not designed to support a family of 5, like at McDonald's or at Wendy's or something like that.
Right.
You know, even when they say, well, let's get the minimum wage in this country up to $15, it wasn't designed to keep you. That's a job for high school kids, not for a 40-year-old guy with 5 kids.
That's right.
So I always look at really 2 issues. One, that education really is the stepping stone for a lot of people in the world to say, you know, I may not have a college degree, but if I can get a certification, something like computer coding, or I get some skill or welding or like that, I can change my economic situation pretty dramatically. So a college degree is not always necessary anymore in this culture. You know, I have 4 of them, and I think, you know, sometimes I'm probably trained in the wrong things. I needed a harder skill. I came out of college with an English degree, and I didn't know how to do anything with that. So you look at this time in our world, the education opportunities have now exponentially changed with the internet. So we don't need to be in a college classroom anymore. If you have access, and you can go to the library to get this, if you have access to the computer, you can take all the classes you want, sometimes for free or for very little cost. Education really changes people's lives. And then the second part is just that fractured family piece where we just don't have that continuity of support. Our parents taught us right and wrong and got after us. They were sort of the police department of the family and inside the house. We don't have that anymore, and it's disturbing to me that, you know, you see kids that are just unstructured and just roaming around getting into all kinds of problems, and we know some of the quick cures for it, we just can't seem to get there.
I remember telling folks that I was confident my mom had eyes in the back of her head. And my mom used to say, "Don't lie to me." She says, "I don't have to read the book after I've seen the cover." I mean, you couldn't hide anything from that woman.
My parents could silence me with a look. They could look over and just give me a disappointed, "We're disappointed in you," and I was, you know, a puddle of tears.
On this security thing, by the way, it's not only, and of course this family, what we, as a ministry, as a faith-based Acts Media Group, we are concerned about the family. In fact, I made myself a note one day, and I wrote it in here, that if I was the devil, here's how I would come into power. I'd begin by destroying the family, undermine the family. That'd be where I would make my entrance. And but now, because the family, and we have these stupid smartphones, and we have the internet and all that, every 3 seconds, someone in the United States is a victim of cybercrime. So you probably not only will teach people about concealed carry and how to have security in a business marketplace or in an office, churches, but do you have people that can help folks regarding not being victims of cybercrime?
That's an area that I'm not strong in, but I have subcontractors that can do it.
I figured you would have.
And the reason for that, as you've said, is identity theft and hacking into, you know, bank accounts. And now what we see too is this really insidious thing called ransomware. So they'll attach onto the payroll system of a city, and several cities in Missouri have had this happen, and several libraries in Missouri. I do a lot of library work, and some of the libraries in Missouri have had that happen. So they'll grasp on these outside, it's usually Eastern Bloc countries, third world countries, where these guys are pretty smart. They grab onto the payroll system, they grab onto some module inside the IT system, they hold it hostage, and they say, you know, for $65,000 in payable in Bitcoins, we'll release this back to you. And I've seen some articles from these security experts that say, pay the money, pay the ransom, which I think is a mistake. All that does is encourage more of the same down the road. Sort of the parallel is, you know, kind of in the old days, we used to evacuate a building if we had a bomb threat. What does that encourage? More bomb threats. So bomb threats are hoaxes. They're not made by real bombers. Bombers make bombs. Bomb threat makers make bomb threats. So this idea of the ransomware paying this to these people just encourages more of the same. So I think, you know, we need a vigorous federal government response, whether it's the FBI or the CIA or we have, you know, national defense services, that we can focus on this hacking IT piece. I mean, they hack the White House all the time. They hack credit card companies and banks all the time. It's an insidious issue, and you know, We talk about crooks being sort of lazy. They don't have to break into your house anymore. They can just use a keyboard.
Okay, I'm not a prophet necessarily, nor the son of a prophet, but I can tell you, Steve, I believe you're in the prime of life. You have all this experience. You have all these subcontractors. I know you do seminars and stand-up presentations to companies and all kinds of interest about security, how to keep a place secure, the workplace, etc. I believe you're going to see this cyber security as another major part of your company. I really believe that, because not only I have these stats about every 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3. Was just a victim of a cyber crime. That's 20 every minute. That's 1,200 every hour, and that's 28,800 every day. That's 10,512,000 every year. I think another side of your business is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
In crime, there's something called the shadow figure or the dark figure, which is the unreported part. So you talk about the things at least we know about.
That's right.
Think of all the ones that are unreported.
That's right.
I don't know anybody that's not been hacked or had some sort of issue with their identity. They had to change a credit card number, or somebody got a hold of their social security number. It's so common. And these guys are really smart. I mean, they have lots of time, lots of software. You know, if you pay the right amount of money, you can buy the best password hacking software on the planet, and they can get through almost any password that's created. It's amazing.
I know of more than one major ministry that was hacked, and it to correct things becomes very expensive if you're fixing things after the fact. If you can fix it before the fact so that you head them off the path, so to speak, it's a lot less expensive. Steve, as far as I'm concerned, whatever, and I have no idea, whatever you charge for your services is cheaper than trying to fix something afterwards. It's like prenatal care. It's like our engineer over there and station manager, Matt Pearson. He's on a program. Matt, you've lost weight, 15 or 20 pounds recently?
30.
30 pounds now. Looking good. I'm so proud of you. And you see, by doing that, he will be heading off at the pass some medical problems that could be very expensive. Go ahead and speak to us.
Oh, well, you know, my dad had his first heart attack at 45, and I'll be 40 this year, next month actually. We got diabetes, heart disease, and all kinds of stuff in our family.
Well, I'm proud of you, young man.
You've been on me for a while, Dr. Paul.
I kind of hounded him a little bit.
Good job, Matt.
I kind of hounded him, and I told somebody about him that had a program, and I said, zero in on Matt, and guess what they did? And
Here we are.
30 pounds, that's significant. Stay with it.
I am.
See, but
I can't go back to the way I was before.
that's a good example of people ahead of needing something. What can you do? What do you offer out there?
I guess one of the problems I face is, people don't like to talk about bad things, so they put it off.
Well, here on the happy hour, we talk about them and keep it happy.
It's like life insurance. They don't want to talk about it, or it's like getting a colonoscopy or something. They don't want to do that stuff.
Oh, I have a good story about that.
So the issue for me is oftentimes I have to talk about with companies and company leaders who don't want to address the things we're talking about, and then after something happens, they can't spend enough money on it to fix the problem. So it's really difficult to get them to pay attention to things like training or site security assessments, where they go, we've never had a problem here. One of my colleagues in Hollywood is a guy named Gavin DeBecker. He's the security guard to all the stars. He protects Oprah. He protects Jeff Bezos from Amazon. And he talks about something called the myth of no past problems. In your company, you say, well, nothing like that's ever happened and probably won't. Or it was boring here yesterday and it was boring here last month and boring here the year after that. Therefore, we don't need security. And I always say I don't use the past as a predictor of the future. We didn't predict 9/11. We didn't predict a lot of bad stuff that happened in our world. And so it's always interesting that there's lots of money to be spent on consultants and security and improvements and equipment and after something happens.
Right.
But beforehand they say we don't have any money, or we're not going to address that right now, or it's not in the budget. And so I come up with that all the time. It's interesting to me that my entree point into organizations is usually the human resources director. They're the people folks. They're the ones that hire and support and train and orient the new employees. They're the ones that have more sometimes of a sense of this issue than the leadership does, because the leadership's often focused on the money part and not on the people part.
I was sitting here listening to you thinking about 20 years ago we bought the house that we're in, and I wasn't particularly aware of it, but one day, because I didn't know about the alarm system, they didn't inform us, that thing was going off all over the place. And I mean, when it goes off, the whole neighborhood knows it. And my oldest son was there, and we started looking for a button to push, something to do, because this was all strange to us. I'd never had any experience with them. Neither had he. Finally, we end up in the attic, and he's got wire cutters, and he just starts cutting wires. We found the siren, cut the wires to it. So then I did my research, and that's when I called in our security company, and
had them rewire everything that he cut.
Oh yeah, oh yes. And had I been informed ahead of time, I'd have saved about $400. And 20 years ago, $400 was more money than it is now. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you about either a one-on-one or a small group or whatever work in these days, so they can get the information they need and set up something, how do they do it?
Yeah, I have some specialty areas. I work with churches for security. I'm really involved in church security around the country. I started in California with a mega church there called The Rock, which is run by a former San Diego Charger football player. And I do a lot of things with government and a lot of things with private sector organizations. So 866-261-5150 is a good way to get a hold of me. I can always talk to people about what's going on in their organizations. I tend not to do home security. That's market's covered pretty well here in Springfield.
Right.
I tend to do things that are connected to government or in private sector businesses and churches.
Oh, how about can you advise churches? They don't even have to be in an isolated area against how they might be able to protect themselves in the middle of the night when you've got thugs and hoodlums just wanting to break in and spray paint and burn something and whatever.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I have a good partnership with a gentleman in Arkansas. He used to be an Arkansas State Trooper. He's worked for the Walton family. He has a really good church security program, and we really focus on a couple areas. One is, how do we train the volunteers to be armed inside the church to protect the congregation? And that's really an important area, because you don't want people shooting the wrong folks, and typically there's one bad guy and he has a plan. And we've seen around the country where professionally trained, supported church security teams can stop these threats. I think also we have to train the ushers and the people that provide seating services and things like that. They're not necessarily have to be armed, but there's got to be a plan. And there has to be a way to say the armed people have trained together at a range, for example, and they've trained inside their facility as to know where to be and where not to be. And then we look at the overall population of the church coming in to make sure that we're telling them the right things to do in an emergency in terms of evacuation, getting out safely. The national model for violence in the workplace, whether it's a church or a school or a business, is run, hide, fight. Run out of the building, get away as fast as possible, taking as many people as you can. We have elderly folks, we have people in wheelchairs, we have people that are not, don't have really good mobility. We have kids that we need to get out of the building as well. And then the second part is hide out. Someplace we can hide out in the sanctuary or in some of in the training rooms or break rooms or classrooms. I'm a big believer in the lockable classroom for students. We need to keep our kids locked in that rare situation. And then the third one is fight back. And the idea that sometimes people get from watching these perpetrators, they're armed with, multiple weapons and tons of bullets and things like that, tactical vests. That doesn't make them warriors. It doesn't make them tactical experts. These are guys just, goofballs that live in their parents' basement. These are not trained commandos that are doing these things. These are fantasy guys, Coca-Cola cowboys that don't have these real tactics. We can stop these people. Fire extinguisher, pot of coffee to the face, a heavy book. They're not expecting to get resistance from the group. They're expecting compliance, and that's how we stop them.
I just thought of, Nancy, about if you have a good big Bible, you could hit them with the word.
That's right.
I like the way you put that about these Coca-Cola cowboys. Last week I referred to silly putty people. Silly putty used to make it in any shape or to bounce around, whatever. We have a lot of people like that. That's a part of the mob mentality. Or some guy sees something and he fantasizes, romanticizes church shooting or school shooting, and in his twisted way decides that'd be something interesting to do, whatever. We've talked here now about church and safety, and I'm all for that. And we are a faith-based broadcast. However, I know that a number of years ago, the Holy Spirit dealt with me about getting a message into the secular marketplace. And so, what do you do if you're in the mall and those people riding that little thing that you stand on, they're way down, they're half a mile away, and they're not really highly trained. They're mall cops. Nothing against that,
right?
But they're not highly trained in these things. What do you do if you're in the mall and a shooter shows up?
I think we go back to the run, hide, fight piece, and I've said the same thing to my kids. They're adults, and I've said the same thing to people in the training environment for almost 30 years, which is, again, we talked about at the top of the hour, the police are not going to be there to save you. The mall security, that's not their function. They're usually unarmed. So you say, I need to get myself out of harm's way first. That's run away. The second is I need to get as many people with me, strangers included, my kids, my family, into a safe place where we can lock the door and barricade the door. One of the things we know about these perpetrators, they don't shoot through the door. They don't impersonate the police. We've never seen that happen. So getting behind a locked door is a huge advantage.
I didn't know that. I didn't know they didn't shoot through doors.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Third part, and if they come up to a barricaded door and they can't get inside, you know what they do? They move on. You know why? And we know this, and you've seen it. There's a very short window of time for them to do what they want to do before the police arrive.
Okay.
I've trained thousands of cops in the United States, and they're all trained in this run, hide, fight model, which is show up and engage with the bad guy, show up and engage with the shooter. The best way for them to do that is not have to worry about innocent people in the way, they've run off, or innocent people in the way who have not barricaded themselves in a safe place.
Okay.
So there's lots of places. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and you say, could I barricade myself in the restroom with as many people as I could? Maybe. Could I leave the building by running through the kitchen? Absolutely. So I always think about these things and say, might never happen the rest of my time on this planet. Could happen tomorrow. I make no predictions about things. I go about my business in what I would call condition yellow. Condition yellow says when I'm in the public, I'm around strangers, I pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
Condition white is
right.
eat your sandwich at home in front of the TV and enjoy your family. It's safe and quiet there. You're on your break at work. You're in the break room. It's quiet. That's condition white. Rest up. Get your energy back. Condition red is protect yourself or get out of there. So I always tell people in the training environment, especially if you work in public government or you can public contact job, retail stores, things like that, stay in condition yellow when you're, quote, on the floor in front of other people.
All right. You've got a lot of material about conceal and carry, and there's three volumes here, 3 books that way. What are your current thoughts about where we are? Well, since we're in Missouri, Missouri and conceal and carry in Missouri, where are we on that right now?
I think we're an open carry state. You don't need a permit in this state as well, which is good. There's something
Open carry, explain.
Yeah, open carry. You can carry a gun outside of concealment. You don't need it to be
Okay,
concealed.
so as long as it's visible.
But we also are a concealed carry state, and Matt knows this probably better than I do, having come from where I came from in California. But there's something that's
We
sort
call
of
it constitutional carry.
sure. There's something related to that which the president could do with a stroke of a pen if Congress did what they need to do. There's an HR, House Representative bill, I can't remember the number, but it's a reciprocity bill for concealed carry permits. So if you have one in Kansas, and you have one in Missouri, and you have one in California, you have one in Nevada, Oregon, Idaho, they're all the same.
I see.
So the equivalent would be, say, I have a driver's license which allows me to drive in Missouri, but allows me to drive in every other state as well. I don't need to get a fresh driver's license every time I go to another state to visit or to live. The concealed carry permit reciprocity bill keeps coming up into Congress. It has bipartisan support, not a lot of Democrats, but some. If that got passed and Trump signed that, we would say everybody in the United States who has a concealed carry permit, it's good for everywhere. Because, for example, if you drive into Illinois and you don't have a concealed permit for Illinois, you're subject to being arrested if you have a firearm. That's happened to people. New Jersey, New York, same type of thing.
That makes a sticky wicket, doesn't it? Where are you going to, if you get to the middle of the bridge over the Mississippi,
I mean,
and you've got, what are you going to do with your firearm?
Technically, you're supposed to unload it, put the bullets in one part of your car, and the gun in the trunk in a lockbox. I mean, that would be the safest thing to do. But if you look at these other states where you say we have concealed carry here, but not right across the border, that's ridiculous. So we need a reciprocity bill that's already in the House, needs to get passed by the House, sent over to the Senate, signed by Trump. Trump said he's going to sign it. He's an NRA guy. He knows the deal.
Okay, now, for those of you, and I know you're out there, who say, I don't like guns, and I wish we didn't have guns. Well, guess what? We have them. They're here, and it doesn't. I'm of the opinion, Steve, that it doesn't. In the United States, no matter what the government does, we have a lot of private firearms, and in this country, and they're not going away. They're here. They're going to be here. Guns are a reality. Well, there's Tanner over there, Tanner Gibbs. Guitars are a reality, Tanner. Aren't you glad? Okay, he plays guitar. That's Matt's son. Matt plays guitar. Okay, guns are a reality. This thing of getting rid of all the guns and so forth, this is pie in the sky. We're not going to become London Bobbies and just carry a nightstick. Guns are a reality. Let's deal with it, and let's get educated.
Training, and you know, obviously what you're talking about, you already know this. Training is the biggest part, especially for new gun owners. They say, what do I need to do? I said, you need to go to a range and get a training class with a qualified gun instructor or a qualified range master. Simple as that. You should not carry a gun, should not have a gun in your house unless you've been through training. Simple as that.
Well, we have a lot of folks that may not know in their minds, that they may not float to the surface about how important guns have been in our history, how important they still are today. And not everybody should carry a gun. Not everybody should have access to a gun.
Or needs to, right.
But
if you don't want to, that's fine. The other part for me is that there is a sense of following the rules of gun safety, no matter what your age is, how long you've owned a gun. Those rules are carved in stone. Got to do it.
Well, we're going to have you back, because we've begun to scratch the tip on the top of the iceberg. Matthew Dillon Pearson says our time is up, and I agree. How about that? So this is old Dr. Paul, along with sweet little Miss Nancy, and our special guest, Dr. Steve Albrecht. Check his website, check his phone number, take your notes, tell a friend, and we'll be here next Friday morning, same time. Meantime, stay blessed.